Now on Overnights,
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with a treasury of common sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
How are you, mate?
Yeah, good, thanks, Phil. How about yourself?
I'm okay. I like this topic headline that you've given us here to talk about politicians throwing petrol on the housing bonfire.
That's right, mate. It's been a week to remember. So when I woke up on Sunday morning, I opened up my phone, as you know, a lot of us do, and I saw two absolutely bizarre announcements from both sides, which is basically both of them promising to blow a massive housing bubble. And just let me explain. So Australia's, as we know, is suffering from a housing crisis, and it's suffering from a housing crisis because its house prices are among the highest in the world relative to incomes. We have some of the most indebted households in the world. Households carry, some of the highest debt to disposable income in the world. And if you're a renting Australian, you're spending a record share of your income on rent. The highest share of your income's on rent in history. So it's a real triple whammy here. We've got record high house prices as a share of income, some of the highest household debt in the world, and paying a record high share of your income on rent. And one of the reasons why house prices and rents are so expensive is because our politicians, in all their infinite wisdom, decided to grow the population like a science experiment from the mid-2000s through, by massively increasing immigration. Now, Australia's population's grown by an extraordinary 8.7 million people this century. That's 46%, which is the largest percentage increase in population in the advanced world. And this population surge has resulted in a chronic shortage of housing to both buy and rent, and that's one of the main reasons why our housing is so expensive in Australia, both to buy and rent. Now, according to opinion polls, Labor looks certain to win the upcoming election. So I'm going to be focused on Labor's policies tonight because they're the ones who, let's face it, are odds on to win government. And Labor's promised two policies that are certain to send house prices surging higher. Now, and also increase household debt and make housing structurally more unaffordable in the future. And first of all, this was announced, a couple of months ago, but Labor announced that mortgage lenders would no longer need to consider student debts when they assess mortgage serviceability. And according to Compare the Market, which is a sort of analysis firm which compares mortgages and that sort of thing, they estimated that if you're a young graduate home buyer with a pre-tax income of $75,000, you'd be able to borrow $26,800 more under these lending standard changes. So that's not too much. But if you're a home buyer with $125,000 pre-tax income, because of Labor's policy to exclude student debt from the loan assessments, you'd be able to borrow $95,000 extra.
Right.
So that on its own would increase borrowing capacity and would push up house prices. But that's only the entree. The main course was delivered on Sunday when Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced that first home buyers would be able to purchase a home with only a 5% deposit, and that's all first home buyers. And that taxpayers, or the government I should say, or taxpayers, would guarantee 15% of every first home buyer's mortgage going forward. Now, this policy, along with the, to a lesser extent, the excluding student debts and mortgage serviceability calculations, these policies will dramatically increase the amount that people can borrow for housing, and it's also going to pull a lot more first home buyers into the market. So ones that were previously, saving a deposit, they couldn't quite afford to get in, or they had, they couldn't borrow enough to get a home, will suddenly be able to buy a home. And the Reserve Bank of Australia is projected by the financial markets to cut interest rates another 5 times this year. So according to financial markets, they're expecting a cash rate of 2.85% at the end of the year, which is down from 4.1% currently. So when you factor in low interest rates, as well as first home buyers being able to borrow a hell of a lot more money for housing backed by the taxpayer in the case of the 5% deposits, this is ingredients to basically massively increase house prices in Australia and also increase household debt, because first home buyers will be able to borrow with 5% deposit, which means they'll be taking on much bigger loans. 15% of those loans will be guaranteed by taxpayers, which means the banks will be happy to lend that. And as a result, we're going to have more money chasing the same number of homes, which means that prices are going to surge. And this 5% deposit scheme is effectively a state-sponsored subprime mortgage scheme that has been announced by Labor. And all it's going to do is it's going to make housing more expensive, and it's going to push up house prices even more, make Australia even more expensive relative to the rest of the world, mean our households carrying even more debt than they did previously. And it's going to be self-defeating from an affordability perspective, because we know whenever the federal government does a first home buyer scheme or any of these sort of subsidies, prices go up. And when they go up, housing becomes less affordable. And then we're generally greeted with more of these demand-side policies whereby the government then introduces a new scheme to try and bring more people in, and then that just pushes prices up and makes housing less affordable. So this is an absolute disaster of a policy. And it's going to lead to, Australian housing, which is already among the most expensive in the world, is going to become even more expensive. The amount of debt that we carry, which is already amongst the highest in the world, is going to grow. And we're going to suck more of the nation's financial capital into the housing market.
Yeah,
and
of course.
And the housing market's already worth $11.3 trillion. It's valued at more than 4 times the economy. So it's ginormous, and we're just going to make it even bigger.
Yeah.
Which is completely ridiculous.
You would have thought that they would have learnt from the last subprime lending disaster, wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely. Look, this is just clown show stuff from Labor, but the coalition's announcements weren't much better, but they're obviously very unlikely to get in. But they've also done similar sorts of policies which are equally stupid. So the coalition has promised to allow first home buyers to access their super savings for a housing deposit. So that's just going to increase their borrowing capacity and bid up house prices. And the coalition also promised to make first home buyer mortgages for new homes tax deductible. So effectively allow first home buyers, if you buy a new home, to negatively gear your property. And that would, if it came into effect, would obviously inflate the cost of new housing, because developers would just pass the cost on. They'd fatten their margins. They go, great, we can charge more. But not just that, it would also suck tax revenue out of the budget. So the coalition gave an example of a buyer on $120,000 a year under their policy, borrowing $650,000 would save $12,000 a year in tax. Well, that's $12,000 a year that the federal budget's not going to get. And given the federal budget's already projected to be in deficit for the next 10 years, it's a bit stupid to suck more money out of the federal budget for the sake of propping up the housing market.
Yeah.
And ultimately the big winners out of these policies, Bill, will be those who own investment properties, because, if you're just a regular person who owns a house, well, whether your house goes up or down, whatever, I mean, obviously people don't want to go down, but you buy and sell in the same market. So if your house goes up and then you need to buy another house in the future and sell this one, well, you're not really any better off. You end up just paying more stamp duty. But the big winners from this policy are going to be those who own second homes. So whether it's a holiday house or an investment property, because they're just going to get a free kick here, the value of their asset's going to rise and they're going to be richer. And at the same time, future Australians who need to buy homes are going to be paying a hell of a lot more for their housing. Even though they'll be able to buy with a 5% deposit, the price is going to go up, and we're just going to have to borrow more, and we're going to be on this rat race again, whereby prices continue to grow further away from people's incomes.
Yeah, that's it. And of course, let's not forget the HEX debt too.
That's right. It's just going to blow. It's basically a housing bubble policy.
Yeah.
So really, what we need both sides of politics to do is take the pressure off demand by cutting immigration. Because if you significantly cut immigration, it's great for renters straight up, because you'll have lower rents because there's less rental demand in the market. So if you're a renting household, you're better off. For a first home buyer, you're better off, because first home buyers typically rent first. So if you're paying less for your rents, you can save a deposit quicker. So it makes it easier to save a deposit if you're paying less on rents. And also, lower immigration also reduces the price of housing. So for a first home buyer, it's a double win. You pay less for rents while you're saving up for a house, and then you end up paying less for the house as well, because you've got less demand. That's the policy the federal government should be going for, but instead, like Labor isn't looking to cut immigration. They're instead just throwing more mortgage fuel onto the housing bonfire through their state-sponsored subprime mortgage scheme. It's just nuts.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
And it comes at the same time as on Wednesday, the Australian Bureau of Statistics released new construction data, and what it showed again is that housing construction is running so far below the federal government's target to build 1.2 million homes over 5 years, which requires 60,000 homes every 3 months, every quarter, and 240,000 homes a year. And the latest data on commencements, so dwellings that have started construction, only 41,900 homes commenced construction in the fourth quarter, which is the latest we've got, and that's 18,100 or 30% fewer than Labor's target of 60,000 homes a year. And in a similar vein, the number of dwellings that were completed in the fourth quarter also undershot the target by 25%.
Yeah.
So, and annual dwelling completions and commencements are also running close to a third below the 240,000 needed to meet Labor's housing target. So we've got this situation where we're not building enough homes. We can't build enough homes at the same time as the federal government is maintaining a high immigration policy. And the latest immigration data that we got last week, so it wasn't the official quarterly immigration number. Every month, the Bureau of Statistics releases data on net permanent long-term arrivals, which is basically tracks the official net overseas migration data very closely. It's the leading indicator. And what it showed is in the first 2 months, January and February this year, we received 155,000 net permanent and long-term arrivals in Australia. And it was the second highest number on history, only marginally below last year's record of 161,000. And what this data tells you is that at the same time as this dwelling construction is way below the government's targets and we're not building enough homes, looks like immigration is rebounding again, and it's grown again in the first quarter of this year. So, we've still got very, very high immigration, historically high immigration, some of the highest in history, at the same time as our dwelling construction is stagnating. And it's running so far below what the government's target is. And as a result, CoreLogic and PropTrack this week, which are two data agencies on housing, reported that rental growth has accelerated in the first quarter of this year. And a lot of that would reflect this rebounding immigration at the same time as we're not building enough homes. So, essentially Australian housing is going to remain in shortage so long as the population demand by immigration continues to exceed supply. And unfortunately, the Labor Party doesn't want to do anything about that. Instead, it wants to throw unbelievable fuel on the housing bonfire through its reckless policies.
Well, that's
most notably this 5% deposit scheme backed by taxpayers.
That's it. They're going to have to bite the bullet and deal with the immigration word. Where can we go and find more information, buddy?
Yeah, so if you want to read more of these sorts of things, go to macrobusiness.com.au. I write a lot on the housing market, on immigration, on energy policy, on economics, and that sort of thing.